Hello, I'm CJ Werleman, and in this episode, we reveal how the nexus connecting Ritter and Medhurst, Scott Ritter, and the Grayzone website sabotaged solidarity for Syrians and is now doing real harm to Palestine. But first, please remember to like and subscribe to our show. Now let's get into it. After 14 years of war, displacement, bloodshed and torture, Syria is now free. A new nation is born, allowing 13 million displaced Syrians to return home for the first time in years and decades, and to reunite with loved ones, repair their shattered lives, and contribute to the reconstruction of a new Syrian state.
A huge celebratory mood here. More and more people are arriving. Already there are thousands and thousands that have arrived from different parts of the country. So people are coming from Aleppo, the city that has been, particularly eastern part, has been leveled by the regime forces. People are coming from Homs, a city that has remained under the siege of the regime for 3 years, and people were starved to death. People are coming from Hama, a city that has been massacred twice. People are coming from Dar'a, when people have been starved to death. Thousands and thousands of the rebels have been killed. So now they are coming from all across Syria to celebrate their victory, to celebrate the fall of a regime that lasted more than half a century, that has ruled over Syria by brutality, by torture, by prisons.
Returning Syrians are now frantically searching for any information regarding their missing loved ones, many of whom were disappeared in Assad's human slaughterhouses or buried long ago in a network of mass graves that pockmarked Damascus neighborhoods.
I came to ask about my husband, Bassem al-Qasim. We lost him in 2014.
Amar doesn't have all the answers for the people here, but today he's the bearer of bad news. He's told Aman her husband's name was found on an official document listing prisoners executed in Sidnaya prison.
One mass gravesite alone is said to contain the bodies of more than 100,000 people who were handcuffed, blindfolded, and murdered by Assad during the past 40 years. The size and scope of the former regime's industrial-scale slaughter is now only coming to light. And Syria's healing can only begin once the perpetrators of the 21st century's worst genocide are held accountable. And it's with that objective in mind that hundreds of Syrians have urged our program to produce this episode. One that exposes the network of Western bloggers who help perpetuate the mass slaughter and mass incarceration by parroting lies and conspiracies that undermine global solidarity for Assad's victims. We're not only talking about well-known Western journalists like Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate, but also a slew of YouTubers who were paid big dollars by the Assad regime to convince Western audiences that Syrians experienced only peace and prosperity under the dictator's rule.
هذا الشيء كثير يعني مستفز. نحن كسوريين نشوف هيك مثلا يوتيوبر سوري او غير سوري او اجنبي او مين كان وقت عم بيقول انه والله هدول هاي المدن او مثلا اليوتيوبر بيروح على مدينتي بشوف انا مدمره وانا كنت عايش هنيك وعم بوثق الاحداث هنيك بقول والله هدول الارهابيين هن اللي دمروها. هذا الشيء ما صحيح ابدا. يعني هذا الحكي، بس هذا الحكي هو كثير بيساعد النظام بالنسبه للمجتمع اللي برا، بالنسبة للمجتمع العربي أو الغربي أو أي مجتمع يعني ما عنده دراية عن سوريا أكيد بده يصدق هذا اليوتيوبر المتابعين اللي عنده يعني. لذلك هذا الشيء يعني كثير مستفز بالنسبة لنا.
The international community, and particularly those in the media, have a moral obligation to examine why Assad was able to get away with committing genocide unchallenged for more than a decade. The words, never again, must mean never again for everyone, not just the Jewish people. You see, in my professional field, the field of human rights journalism, the most egregious and unforgivable sin any public figure can make, other than committing the crime itself, is to deny, minimize, or whitewash human rights abuses, including genocide. For this reason, the world's leading scholar on mass killing identifies genocide denialism to be the final stage of the genocide process, arguing that the complete or attempted annihilation of a people requires the banishment of recollection and suffocation of remembrance. It's now just an undeniable fact that Zionists and Assadists are guilty of genocide. But if the world can't agree on this objective truth, then their respective crimes will be repeated again in the future. We must never let this happen. Which now brings me to the meat of this episode, in showing you how a network of authoritarian regime coddling bloggers were paid by foreign governments to deny Assad's genocide and atrocities in Syria, which not only undermines solidarity for the Syrian people, but also sabotaged the political will to stop the Assad regime years ago. I'm specifically referring to the nexus that connects Scott Ritter, Richard Medhurst, and the Grayzone website. Although I could easily include many others, such as Eva Bartlett and Vanessa Beeley. These individuals are at the beck and call of every dictator who needs his crime scene scrubbed clean. They will say anything about anyone and for any price, and they will also switch positions in an instant, and I mean altogether at once, depending on where the wind blows or the direction from which the money flows. They were paid tens of thousands of dollars each to deny Assad used chemical weapons against the Syrian people, and to falsely accuse gas attack victims of staging their own deaths. As this money trail investigation shows, with Max Blumenfeld receiving $20,000 alone from one murky pro-Assad organization. And although their lies and conspiracies have been exposed and debunked too many times to count, the downfall of Assad means his victims now finally feel safe enough to step out of the shadows, speak for themselves, and counter the lies that were said. The Grayzone website is a textbook example of a website that runs interference for some of the world's worst human rights violators. Its Wikipedia page says it all, in pointing to hundreds of examples in which it has been accused of misleading reporting, downplaying the persecution of Uyghur Muslims in China, and publishing conspiracy theories in Syria, and pushing pro-Russia propaganda in Ukraine. For years, it was the go-to site for pro-Assad propaganda. But it wasn't always this way. You see, before Assad's money rolled in, Grayzone writers were honest and accurate in reporting the Assad regime's genocidal war crimes, as you can see from their now deleted tweets here. With the website's owner even doing the honourable thing in 2012 when he publicly resigned as a columnist from a major Lebanese newspaper, citing the outlet's pro-Assad propaganda for his decision to leave.
I noticed the opinions in favor of Assad had grown more strident on the website. This was a point where, by all accounts, the Assad regime had killed as many as 10,000 people in order to remain in power, possibly 13,000, according to people I know inside Syria who've come out. I've done extensive interviews and during the past few weeks, partly prompted by my anguish about my own position as a staffer at Al-Akhbar. The Assad regime was running an institution of torture in prisons. Possibly 100,000 people are in prison right now. And this makes Israel look like a champion of human rights.
Max Blumenfeld's criticism of the Assad regime abruptly ended in December 2015, the moment he returned from Moscow, where he attended the 10th anniversary of Kremlin propaganda network Russia Today. When he returned to the United States later that same month, he, along with every one of his Grayzone employees, instantly and simultaneously deleted their anti-Assad tweets and began pushing Russian-manufactured conspiracies to vilify and demonize the dictator's opposition. Now, it would be one thing if only Blumenfeld reversed course on Assad after returning from Russia. But it's a whole different thing altogether when every single one of his employees reversed theirs at the exact same time. That's not coincidence, that's coordination. One of the very first Kremlin manufactured conspiracies Grayzone pushed was in September 2016, when they hurled bogus allegations against the White Helmets, a Syrian volunteer rescue organization that's credited with saving more than 100,000 lives and rewarded with a Nobel Peace Prize. Footage taken by White Helmet volunteers revealed to the world the full horror of Assad and Russian airstrikes on residential buildings, schools, and hospitals. So, Grayzone began falsely claiming the White Helmets were either a front for Al-Qaeda and/or a front for the CIA. And not without coincidence, Grayzone's smearing of Syrian first responders came at the exact moment the White Helmets begged the United Nations to implement a no-fly zone over Syria to protect civilians. And at the same time, the United Nations confirmed Assad used chemical weapons against civilians. Blumenthal even mocked Syrian gas attack victims in a photo he posted on Twitter, suggesting Syrians wore gas masks only to hurt Assad and not because they were terrified of being hit with the same weapons again. In 2017, I published this article, shortly after Assad displaced another 400,000 Sunni Syrians from eastern Ghouta. I interviewed dozens of Syrian refugees who explained to me how debunked conspiracy theories and bogus allegations shared by the Grayzone and its network of disinformation actors were hurting them personally. A famous Syrian activist told me, "This propaganda facilitates the gas attacks, hospital burnings, sectarian cleansing, and so on. And it contributes to the general demonization of Muslims and Arabs in our culture." Adding that this propaganda has been carefully planted and guided to distract attention from the crimes committed by Assad, Iranian and Russian occupations against civilians in Syria and to prevent solidarity with those victims. Hacked emails and other documents from the Iranian government-funded Press TV show payments of thousands of dollars were secretly funneled to Grayzone's online editor, Wyatt Reed, who is now synchronizing a propaganda campaign to minimize and deflect the horrors that took place at Assad's cyanide prison. They borrow from the Zionist playbook in accusing victims of doing the very same thing their perpetrators did to them. They accuse every Syrian of being Al-Qaeda the same way Israel accuses every Palestinian of being Hamas or a terrorist. They belittle and dehumanize, they obfuscate and disparage, and flood social media with lies and misinformation to confuse and deflect. Their racist lies and conspiracies dehumanize Syrians to the point of being mere statistics, as explained by my good friend Moazzam Beg, who was tortured by US forces in Afghanistan and Guantanamo Bay.
43,000 Palestinians have been killed right now. Then that is something we cannot stand for. But then what will you say when 610,000 Syrians have been killed?
Yeah.
Why is that number simply just a statistic that you're not even prepared to look at? It means that you have dehumanized the Syrians to the level of which you would not do that to anybody else. And the thing that was in common, that the West, Assad, Russia, were saying that these are all Al-Qaeda, these are all terrorists. And using the language of terrorism, it's our experience is once you've done that, you've delegitimized and dehumanized those Muslims.
Grayzone's disinformation network extends to these two individuals, Ritter and Medhurst and Scott Ritter, who have echoed and amplified lies about the Syrian revolution on behalf of the Iranian government for years. But this is not all they share in common. Both have sought illicit and sexual relationships with underage girls, with Ritter convicted and jailed in 2011 for grooming and assaulting a 15-year-old girl online, and with Medhurst accused of grooming 15 to 17-year-old girls in a chat room belonging to a mental health advocacy group, where he also threatened to kill one of his victims while hurling vicious abuse at others. I bring this to your attention only because the former moderator of this advocacy group calls into question Medhurst's affiliations with certain news networks, saying he wouldn't have gotten to where he is today if it wasn't stepping on people and abusing others. And these allegations were verified by an independent fact-checking platform after Medhurst partnered with a pro-Assad propagandist who also works for a Muslim-hating far-right party in Germany. This matters because he continues to abuse 13 million displaced Syrians by smearing them as Al-Qaeda and terrorists while making crude jokes that are meant only to sabotage pity for Assad's victims. He shares the exact same joke Zionists shared online when they accused Palestinians of staging their own deaths at Gaza's hospitals. He wants you to believe the Syrian revolution was a lie. He wants you to believe that Syrians standing up to their brutal dictator was also a lie, even though his comrades at the Grayzone, Rania Khalek and Aaron Mate, are now openly acknowledging the legitimacy of the Syrian revolution. Medhurst is desperate for his viewers to believe Israel was behind the Syrian revolution, which we now know to be a bold-faced lie, given leaked Assad regime documents show that not only did Assad receive intelligence from Israel, but also actively coordinated attacks with Israel against Iranian positions for years, proving once again how the axis of resistance was only ever a facade to bolster Iran's woeful reputation in the Arab world. And we also now know Assad begged Israel for help before fleeing the country, and that his brother forwarded the location of Assad's military and intelligence sites to Israel in exchange for safe passage out of Syria. therefore helping Israel bomb Syria more than 600 times since the dictator fled to Moscow. Medhurst, Ritter, Grayzone and co. never share this kind of crucial information with their audience because doing so contradicts and debunks their pro-Assad conspiracies. Instead, they want you to believe Assad didn't kill 600,000 to 800,000 Syrians, or that he disappeared 10,000 Palestinians and jailed thousands of others more, including Hamas fighters. They lie while revered Palestinian diplomats and scholars courageously tell the truth, like Rashid Khalidi, who explains the reality about Assad and his relationship with Palestine.
The Assad regime was an ally of the Palestinians. I was in Beirut when the Syrian army came in, intervened against the PLO in 1976, when it helped the Lebanese forces to capture and slaughter the population of Deir ez-Zata, when many Palestinians were kidnapped and killed by the Syrian regime. Friend of the Palestinians? Excuse me? I mean, with friends like this, you don't need enemies.
It's for this reason the Palestinian resistance restated its full support for the Syrian revolution again last week, saying it's good news for Palestine.
ويا أهل سوريا إن تحرركم مبشر لنا ولأمتنا للنصر بإذن الله في غزة والقدس وفلسطين اللهم آمين. نبارك للشعب السوري العظيم نجاحه في ثورته ضد الاستبداد والظلم وهو والله جدير بهذا الإنجاز الكبير.
Medhurst also works closely with his pedophile buddy Scott Ritter, and together they are routinely called out by independent fact-checking organizations for sharing false information about Ukraine to help the Russian government conceal its war crimes. Ritter was also recently indicted and his home raided by the FBI for operating as an unregistered foreign agent for the Russian government, which reveals how his opinions are easily procured or easily bought. This is a guy who came to prominence as the UN weapons inspector who refuted claims about WMDs in Iraq. But what he doesn't want you to know is he plays both sides of the fence, depending where fame and fortune leads him. Today, he sells himself to be a pro-Palestine activist, but it wasn't all that long ago when he worked closely with Israel. So close that he shared US intelligence with Israel despite objections from his superior officers. By his own admission and in his own words, he says that he wanted to help UN security teams train, equip and deploy covert teams inside Iraq, operating under the cover of UN weapons inspectors, to spy on Iraqis who were allegedly hiding prescribed weapons and activities. This was in 1998, when Ritter lobbied the US to bomb Iraq during Operation Desert Fox, an air campaign that killed 1,500 Iraqis, but was approved by President Clinton to divert attention away from his White House sex scandal that same year. Today, Ritter bounces from one YouTube channel to the next, pushing propaganda on behalf of the Iranian regime and making promise after promise about how Iran will come to the rescue of Palestine soon, but it never does, it never has. A few years back, Ritter sang a completely different tune, however, in praising Iran for promising the United States it would recognize Israel, suspend its nuclear weapons program, and stop supporting Hezbollah.
Let's talk about the fact that in 2003, this troika sent a letter via the Swiss embassy to the United States government offering not only the normalization of relations between the United States and Iran, but also a negotiated peace settlement between Iran and Israel, and they were willing to put their nuclear program on the table. This was rejected by the Bush administration. What a Revolutionary Guard guy said, why don't you Americans realize that we hate Arabs more than we hate the Israelis, and that we'd rather work with Israel to contain Arab power than to work with the Arabs to contain Israel.
When Assad fled Syria 2 weeks ago, Ritter showed his true colours again when he turned his guns on the Palestinian people, accusing them of bringing about their own destruction because they voiced support for the Syrian revolution, saying the greatest threat to a Palestinian state are the Palestinians themselves, which has to be one of the most objectively vulgar things you can say about 2 million genocide survivors in Gaza. His vulgarity matched by the so-called Syrian girl, who was one of the leading pro-Assad disinformation actors on Twitter. She said to a Palestinian journalist in Gaza, who lost both his children to Israeli airstrikes, that he deserved it because he expressed support for the Syrian revolution. These are truly awful people, proving once again that you can't be pro-Assad and pro-Palestine, given Syria and Palestine have endured almost identical struggles. And while Syria may have seen the last of their dictator, his disinformation actors are still synchronizing their online attacks against the Syrian people, as revealed by the independent Arab fact-checking platform Icard Facts, which found Iranian and Russian accounts are distorting the scene in Syria by pushing false stories that link the revolution to ISIS or terrorism, and that Christians are under attack from Islamist factions among the rebels. It puts individuals such as Vanessa Beeley and Kevorka Malsian at the center of this disinformation constellation. But let me finish with this. The responsibility of any human rights journalist is to speak truth to power and hold powerful people and governments accountable for their criminality and corruption. Therefore, anytime you see or hear a journalist defending a regime, running interference for a regime, or doing public relations for a regime, then you know that person isn't actually a journalist, but a paid propagandist. And when newcomers to a liberation cause figure out a journalist is lying about Syria, then they assume they're also lying about Palestine, therefore undermining solidarity for all struggles. And while you might disagree with me from time to time, and that's okay, what you will never see me do is heap praise on a government or defend a government, because my job is not public relations. My job is to hold governments accountable and never make excuses for them. I'm nobody's paid monkey. What I am is a 100% independent journalist, funded exclusively by our audience members, you, via Patreon and YouTube memberships, which means no regime and no public figure is off limits to our program. I'll shut up now for a moment, so you can read and digest these important words. I hope it resonates. I hope it gives certain members of the media a moment to pause and reflect on the incalculable damage they have inflicted upon and already damaged people. They must do better. We can all do better. But that's my time for today. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and we kindly ask you please support our effort to expose and confront injustices in the Muslim world by becoming a member of this show at patreon.com/CJWorleman. We can't produce, sustain and grow this show without your help, and we offer exclusive benefits to those who do. But for now, good night, good morning, wherever you are, and stay blessed.